week. It starts on Thursday and it goes until Sunday. If you have any last minute donations, we will take them. You can just bring them up to the front desk or someone will help you get them out of your car. We also have a few spots of volunteer work at the book sale. So if you would like to do that, you can go on our website. I believe, let's see here, it's under the About tab and then support the library. And then you can sign up if you would like to. We'd be very appreciative. So without further ado, our presenter is Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for coming tonight. And she's the author of Sustainable Minimalism, and she's here to talk about decluttering. So I'm going to hand it over to her. Again, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for, again, joining us to talk about decluttering on a beautiful Michigan evening. It is rainy and disgusting here. I live in Massachusetts outside of Boston, so I'm a little bit jealous to hear about the great weather. I have a three-part, I don't know, I don't want to say show, but a three-part program for you all tonight. The first part is related to who I am, how I got here, and what on earth I'm talking about. And then part two, which will be the bulk of our time today, is a PowerPoint presentation about the 5 pillars of responsible decluttering. Because again, we're not just talking about decluttering, we're talking about responsible decluttering and fundamentally changing, hopefully for the better, our relationship with stuff. And then after that, I'll save about hopefully 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So if as I'm talking, you have questions, please put them in the chat or save them for the end, and I will do my absolute best to get to them. I'll stay as long as I need to answer all the questions. So again, thank you, Mercedes, for the introduction. My name is Stephanie Seferian. I am the author of the nonfiction book, Sustainable Minimalism, which I believe your library has. I am the host of the Sustainable Minimalist podcast, which I always sound so braggy when I say this, but I got to say it. It's a top 10 home and garden show here in the United States. So if you listen to podcasts, check it out. And I got here I didn't start my life. I wasn't a child thinking, oh, I really need to be a passionate advocate for sustainable minimalism. That wasn't in my, plan as I was a high schooler planning out my future. But first of all, prior to doing what I do now, I was a teacher. I taught English literature to high school students. And then my life changed when I became a mother. Prior to being a mother, I was your average, ordinary consumer. I bought whatever I could afford. I went to the mall on the weekends. I tried to have a stocked closet full of the updated fashion items so that I went to my job every day looking fashionable. I was I don't know. I would just say I was an unconscious consumer. I did what most people did, which is buy stuff. And then I had my daughter, my husband and I, and our first daughter. And I'm sorry if you hear my dog. I don't know what's going on up there. She never barks. But when my first daughter was born, my husband and I, and then the dog and the 2 cats and the now infant, we were all living in a 848 square foot apartment in Boston. And 848 is a very specific number, but when space is tight, every square foot matters. So 848 square feet. I was, of course, trying to figure out how to keep an infant alive. That was not in my skill set. But also, I had no free time. And the free time that I did have was spent organizing, cleaning, or putting away all the baby stuff. So my daughter, I'm very fortunate. I have so many friends and family who gifted her, well wishes when she was born. But no joke, this baby had at least 3 dozen beautiful frilly pink dresses. And anybody who has an infant knows infants don't wear frilly dresses day to day. They wear zip-up onesies. And so that's just the clothes. There was also all the gear and all the toys, and space was tight. And so I found myself very quickly realizing that I did not want my free time, which was extremely limited, to be spent dealing with all the stuff. So minimalism was hot then. It's still a little hot, but it was hotter then. And I thought to myself, that's what I need to do and be. I need to be a minimalist. I need to declutter the stuff. If I have that light and airy and spacious Crate and Barrel-esque catalog apartment, like all my problems will be solved. So I decluttered the stuff. I decluttered my daughter's stuff first because that was easiest, and she was an infant and she didn't protest, right? Then I went to my husband's stuff when he was away because he wasn't home. He couldn't protest. Not, I wouldn't recommend that, but that's another story for another day. And then I went on to my own stuff and the common stuff. And I thought to myself, yep, this is it. This is it. But then after I had that like moment of feeling so proud of myself, I had another thought, which is, oh my gosh, where is all this stuff going to go? Oh my gosh, I never should have purchased. I never should have wasted my hard-earned money. I never should have accepted. I never should have brought all these items into my home because they're not adding to my life. They're detracting from my quality of life. And so I thought to myself in that moment, oh no, I'm not a minimalist. I'm not a minimalist because minimalism was all about just decluttering and nobody was talking about what you do with all the stuff. Like the hard part, it's hard to, it is admittedly hard to know what to do with some of the hard stuff, sure. But the harder part, in my opinion, is finding places to donate this stuff to. And I certainly was not on board with filling trash bags and putting them on the curb so that all my perfectly decent stuff with tons of life left in it could go to the landfill. Like I wasn't on board with that. And so I thought to myself, okay, I'm not a minimalist. Well, then maybe I'm like a zero waster. I'm an environmentalist. My goal on this earth is to make less trash. Maybe that's my purpose. But that didn't fit right either, ultimately, because zero wasters are, fundamentally about creating zero waste. And that didn't feel accessible to me as a new mom who was stressed out of her mind, hadn't slept in however long, and so I wanted something attainable, accessible for somebody like me. And that's when sustainable minimalism was born. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go to my presentation now. But before we talk about the 5 pillars of responsible decluttering, we need to talk about conscious consumption. I've been on this journey for 8-ish years now, and yeah, decluttering's great and all, and we'll talk about this throughout the presentation, but I think the real crux of the issue comes in conscious consumption. So let's do this. Okay. Hoping you can all see my screen. If you can't, please write so in the chat. But let's talk about consumerism, right? Maybe you've noticed we Americans have bought into the consumption hamster wheel. We are over consumers. And there are consequences to that. I don't think that marketers and advertisers necessarily want us to think about for too long the consequences associated with overconsumption, but let's just do it. Let's just lay it out. I mean, we're here. It's a beautiful day. You came here instead of going outside, so let's do it. One of the consequences, and the one that I think I aptly mentioned in my little intro there, is an increased mental load. If you've never heard of the term mental load before, mental load is that phrase that's used to describe the sum total of responsibilities required to manage a household. And yes, heavy mental loads are linked to just feelings of distress, emptiness, lowered life satisfaction. And guess what? Those of us who identify as female in heterosexual relationships, we do tend to report having an oversized mental load. It is 2024, and yet in many ways, conventional familial habits still exist. So that's one consequence, an increased mental load. Well, next is, of course, financial stress. As of 2023, I do need to maybe update this with an updated stat, but the average American does carry $21,000 in debt, and that does exclude home mortgages. Financial stress, of course, too, if you felt it, you know it, I know it. Financial stress adds significantly to tension within the family. Debt and stress do often, if not always, go hand in hand. So another consequence. And I'll just say there too, before we go on to the environmental implications, we have a marketplace in which we are told, we are trained from birth. I'm going to use the word trained. We are trained from birth to believe that the solution to whatever problem we're facing lies in a thing. If we just buy it, we'll be prettier or thinner or what more well liked or smarter or whatever the problem is. It can be solved. Theoretically, it can't. Like we know it can't, but we're told it can be solved with a thing. And then we have the credit industry that swoops in and makes us believe that all of our whims and wants, which of course cost money, are attainable, right? Because we can just charge it and deal with it next month when the statement comes in. And none of that's true, is it? So we're saying it here and now because we're bringing it to the light. And then finally, in the ways in which sustainable minimalism differs from minimalism or decluttering or any of those other buzzwords you may hear floating around, sustainable minimalism, which is what I talk about, talks about the environmental implications associated with overbuying. So we tend to not think about an item's before life or after life when we are deciding to buy something new. Perhaps, maybe you're not in the habit of doing that. I certainly wasn't in the habit of thinking about an item's before or after life when I was a teacher, before I had children, before I found myself on this path. But every item has a before life and an afterlife. An item's before life, that has to do with the manufacturing of the item. Manufacturing, creating something, demands non-renewable resources. Keyword non-renewable. Non-renewable. Once it's gone for good. Some of those non-renewable resources that the next item might require include fossil fuels. And don't forget, fossil fuels, the burning of the fossil fuels is what contributes to global warming, and global warming is the main driver behind climate change. So that's the before life. Like, what are we taking? What are we pulling from the earth to create this chair, to create this mug, to create this new fancy jumpsuit, like whatever the item is? There's a before life there that needs to be considered. There's also the afterlife concerns, right? So many of us, we decide we're going to declutter, we declutter, and that's hard. There's a real temptation to just take our stuff, which is perfectly decent, has many years, if not decades of life still left in it. I'm not talking about broken stuff. Broken stuff is a different story, and we'll get to that later. But perfectly decent stuff that somebody else could use and love on. So many of us are just so fed up with the decluttering process because our houses are so cluttered with stuff that we just give up and at the end, right? Like in the 11th hour, we just throw up our hands and we put our stuff in the trash can, and the lovely garbage men and women, and I know that's probably not a politically correct term, but the lovely sanitation professionals take our stuff and they bring it to the landfill. Out of sight does not mean out of planet. Discarded items decompose in landfills, but they do not decompose optimally. They release methane and leachate. So methane, for anyone who's not aware, is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. It's at least 10 times more potent than carbon dioxide, okay? And leachate is not benign either. Leachate, if I can describe it, I can like paint a picture, some imagery in your head. Leachate is like a toxic sludge, and leachate leaches out of landfills and into surrounding communities. So throwing out perfectly good things, that should never happen if we can help it. And we're going to talk about how we can help it in a minute. But I have this quote from my book, and I like it. So again, I'm going to put it out there. There is a solution to the personal and environmental consequences associated with overbuying, and it's simply to buy less. And I will add here, it's to buy less, yes, but it's to buy less new stuff. New stuff. And again, we'll get to that in a minute as well. But so, all right, so you might be wondering, well, what is sustainable minimalism? Let's just go through all this stuff. Sustainable minimalism is not decluttering and putting your decent stuff in the trash can. I think I covered that. Sustainable minimalism is not decluttering and then going back out to the mall or the boutiques or the online shops that you frequent and refilling your home. That's not it. Sustainable minimalism is not keeping items that spark joy and throwing out items that can't. I mean, Marie Kondo has plenty of great things to say, but the spark joy piece, in my personal opinion, is not it. Sustainable minimalism is not even focusing on stuff at all. Sustainable minimalism believes that decluttering is one step. It is the first step on a much larger journey of examining your own unique relationship with your possessions and your place on that consumerist hamster wheel. So I always talk about that moment. I'm bringing you back to my Boston 848 square foot apartment. I'm literally looming over. I'm standing over this gigantic pile of stuff that, again, I didn't need, shouldn't have bought, shouldn't have brought into my home, that was detracting from my life instead of adding to my life. And that now I needed to find places to put all this stuff. And I had what I call, for a lack of a better phrase, a come to Jesus moment, right? In which the end goal is not having that crate and barrel like home. That's not the end goal. The end goal is to fundamentally change my relationship with stuff, to fundamentally change the reasons why I buy stuff that I don't need in the first place, and ultimately to buy new less. Buy new less. And again, we'll get to that in a minute. All right. So I just want to, I know we're going here. So flipping the coin, we talked about the downsides of unconscious consumption. Well, the benefits, and we're going to, again, go through this quick, reduce stress, anxiety, and family tension. I'm not going to read the fun fact, but you please do it on your own, just for time. I have a lot to cover. More free time. More free time. I felt this so tangibly as a new mom. Once I got rid of the excess, I had I was still a new mom. I mean, let's be real. I had slightly more time to breathe. The average American spends 90 minutes per day on household upkeep. That adds up to 60 hours a month. 60 hours of your life every single month spent on household upkeep. I promise you, if you have less stuff, your upkeep hours will be less. You'll still have them, but they'll be less. And then finally, again, this is sustainable minimalism. You will, when you address your consumption habits, and again, it's not a pretty process, but if and when you do, you will have a smaller detrimental environmental impact. 90%, I think that number has gone up. 92, 95% of climate scientists agree human behavior is contributing to global warming and climate change. Now, this is not a talk about being an environmentalist. However, if that's something that interests you, please know that my podcast discusses this in detail. I always discuss the big five. I only have four here, but if you really want to get serious about your environmental impact, it's not about bringing your Stanley Cup or whatever the new thing is to Starbucks. It's not about bringing your bags to Shaw's. I don't know. Do you guys have Shaw's in Michigan? But that's not it. It's about honing in on your diet, the way you get around your car, and how much you fly, how you heat and cool your home, your purchasing habits. Those are the big ones. So I'll leave that there and say, if any of that interests you, come listen to my free podcast and let's move on. Okay, so I'm just going to put this here. You might be wondering, well, what is she talking about? Like, what is sustainable minimalism? I don't even get it. Sustainable minimalism is all of this and more. I'll let you read it And I'll also say today that we don't have time in a 1 hour together to go into all of these things. So we're really just talking about the things that are bolded. And I must apologize. I should change the color because the bold is, not that easy to see. But that's all we're talking about today. The rest of it, come find me. Come listen to my show. All right. So let's get into those pillars now. I got 5 of them. We're going to go through the first 4. I wouldn't say fast, but we're going to move through them. And then we're going to spend the majority of our time on the 5th pillar, which is where do we put our stuff that we want to declutter? Like, how do we declutter responsibly? Don't you worry. I got time for that. All right. So pillar 1, you ready? You awake? All right. Pillar 1, start simple, slow, and easy. I can't tell you, let me just have a sip of my tea. Hold on. Okay, thank you. I can't tell you how many times people reach out to me and say, I have a totally decluttered basement in which I got, my deceased mother's items and my kid who's off at college, all of their stuff. I'm going to tackle the basement. Don't do that. You're setting yourself up for failure. I suggest instead you, again, start simple, slow, and easy. Go to a place with no emotional attachment. You don't want to go to the basement first because you have your deceased mother's stuff there, and that is opening an emotional minefield. So don't go there first. You got to flex the muscle, right? Like I just started lifting weights. That's a whole nother story, but I'm not going to go to the gym and start deadlifting the hundreds, because that is a recipe for a severely torn hamstring, right? You're going to start simple, slow, and easy, and you're going to flex the muscle. You're going to work up to attaining the skills that you need to then later down the line tackle the problem area. So I always suggest, in terms of starting simple, slow, and easy, again, starting in a non-emotional area, a small area that you can tackle and just completely crush in an hour. An hour seems to be a good amount of time. Those places, in my opinion, in a generalized house, tends to be either the linen closet. Like most people, I shouldn't say nobody, most people aren't gonna have an emotional fit with regard to old sheets and towels. So the linen closet or the vanity in the in a bathroom. So the place where you keep the shaving cream and the lotion and all that. What you want to do is you want to start a snowball effect. Like if you choose the right place, what's going to happen is you're going to dramatically change the space that you choose in under an hour, and you're going to feel really darn good about yourself. You're going to feel like you have amazing self-efficacy and self-esteem, and you can do this, you've got this. And so then you can slowly and incrementally move up to harder places. Now, if you don't know like where to start, I always suggest you, what's the word, like um, put some parameters on your efforts. So I often twice a year run a month-long decluttering challenge in which a bunch of people, all of us together, we tackle like one area every couple of days for a month. Okay, so people are keeping us, other people on the same journey as us are keeping us accountable. So we're keeping each other accountable. I also, in my book, which again, your library has, I offer up a 52-week decluttering plan. So like on I don't know, week 6, let's say, all you're tackling for that entire week is your bedside tables in the master bedroom. The bedside tables, I can never, bed stands, what's the word? It'll come to me in about 5 minutes and then I'll say it. But like the side tables next to your bed with the lamp and the alarm clock, that's 1 week. Another week is, I don't know, the console under your television where you have all those old DVDs and video games from 10 years ago. That's a whole nother week. So if if you know yourself, know thyself, and know that you need a bit of structure to your decluttering, there are so many out there on the internet. These are just two, but choose the one that sounds right for you and jump on board. Jump on board, because there is some magic that happens when we do hard things with others and others hold us accountable. All right, so pillar number two, choose when you're decluttering. So you're in the throes of it, right? You're trying to decide what to keep, what to get rid of, what to donate, what to do with all these things. Choose quality items over quantity. So this is depending on your age, my more seasoned uh, participants to these talks, they remember a time, I'm talking 1980s and before. They remember a time when items were made with quality in mind, right? And those of you who are listening are probably nodding your head. But the younger generations, the millennials, the Generation Ys, they don't know that there used to be a time in which items were made with care, in which they lasted for decades or longer. My mother and my husband, my mother and my father, they are since divorced, but they got married in 1979 and they registered for their wedding for a boatload of items, right? I would say that the majority of the kitchen items that my mother registered for in 1979, she's still using and appreciating, and they're working fine. I have her coffee grinder. Her coffee grinder from 1979 still works. I'll tell you that for my wedding in 2011, I also registered for a coffee grinder. I got the new shiny, sleeky's not a word, sleek, stainless steel updated coffee grinder. Guess what? That one's dead and in the trash somewhere. I'm now using my mother's from what, 45 years ago, and that's still working. So choose quality items over quantity. Don't choose aesthetics, right? Choose quality. Now, if you don't have a house full of your mother's old appliances that she registered for at her wedding, like I get it, I suggest you be a curator, not a collector. And that's especially if you have a house full of other people's stuff. So I want you to think about what like a museum curator would do. Are they going to keep every single ceramic bowl that's ever been created in the history of mankind? No, they're not going to do that because space is tight. And guess what? Space is tight in your own home as well, right? You're a curator. You are going to choose the best of the best. The ones that, you smile when you look at them, the ones that have happy, good, positive memories attached to them, right? You're not going to keep every bowl. You're not going to keep every, I don't know, insert item, right? You're going to keep the best of the best. And that's because you're a curator, you're not a collector. Now, if you are of a Generation Y or millennial, and you don't know what a quality item is, because again, I see this all the time. Quality items are traditionally made of, I have it here, solid wood. So real wood, not particle board. Silicone, we'll get to that in a minute. Metal over, wicker, bamboo. So when we talk about silicone comes to prominence in the kitchen specifically. There's a lot of plastic items in the kitchen as well, but silicone boasts, so let me say that again because I stuttered and it's important. Silicone boasts high heat resistance and low toxicity, whereas plastic items, so your plastic spatula, your plastic spoon, your plastic cutting board, name the plastic item. Plastic is flip it in reversed. Plastic offers low heat resistance and high toxicity. Yes, that's correct. So, and again, this is not a topic, this is not a conversation to discuss all the issues associated with plastic, the human health issues, the environmental issues, that's another topic for another day. However, again, if that interests you, my podcast covers it in detail. And then two, wicker is considered it's susceptible to bacteria and fungus, so it may not last the test of time. Bamboo too, bamboo furniture items, bamboo floors. There's chatter that bamboo, because it grows so quickly and so easily, it's more sustainable in terms of furniture or floor production. That all may be true. And certainly if you're replacing your floors, let's say, definitely do your due diligence and consider bamboo. However, bamboo is an extremely soft wood. So if you're purchasing something to keep for the long haul, remember that, right? Remember that. In terms of clothes, in terms of pillows, in terms of throw blankets, in terms of anything that's made from fibers, I always suggest you prioritize items made with natural fibers over synthetic fibers. Natural fibers are fibers that are found naturally. So wool, linen, silk, cotton, organic cotton, preferably. Synthetic fibers, synthetic is kind of like a benign way of saying plastic. Synthetic fibers are made of plastic. Plastic is made from fossil fuels. So the nylons, the polyesters, that's all synthetic fibers. And perhaps you know a little something about the microplastics problem, the nanoplastics problem that we are currently facing, humanity's currently facing, right? So if we're buying these synthetic items, whatever it may be, and we're washing them repeatedly, we're contributing to the microplastics, nanoplastics problems. Yes, but also let's not forget, plastic is not made to withstand the test of time. Whatever it is, it's not made to withstand the test of time. So if you can, as you're decluttering, prioritize keeping the items with natural fibers over synthetics. Because again, you're choosing quality over quantity, yes. But also there's the toxicity issue too, which we really just don't have time to get into today. Natural fibers, less, if any, toxicity over synthetics, which are plastics made from fossil fuels. And then, yeah, I hear this one all the time too. Like, we have this jacket and it's so warm and beloved, but the zipper doesn't work. So if that's the case that you're facing with, I suggest either A, you try and get the zipper fixed so that this item is fully restored to utility. If for whatever reason the problem is not a simple zipper fix, it can't be fixed. You've tried, you've looked into professionals in your area, the item cannot be fixed. It's stained, it's ruined, it's destroyed, but still you love it. I humbly and gently suggest you remember that items that are broken or ripped or stained are no longer working to their full utility. They're no longer considered quality. They're no longer considered quality, no matter how much you love it or how many memories you have associated with the item. So I'm just going to check the time. Okay, we're doing all right. I gotta speed it up. All right, we're moving on to pillar 3, measure true value. Now I am going to go kind of fast on this one, but I will also say that this is the one where people tend to get confused. Measure true value. So I'm going to go fast, but also try and say what I want to say in the best possible way. All right, let me know how I do. Measure true value. All right, so any item you have in your home, a chair is meant to sit on. A candle is meant to give a bit of light. A cup is made to hold a liquid, right? Like, any item in your home has a fundamental reason for existence. Like, it was made for a reason, right? However, a possession that's not regularly used for its utility really has no value to you at the end of the day. So if you're saving all of your aunt's wine glasses in the basement. Their utility is to hold wine, but they're not holding wine because they're in your basement. We need to reassess our understanding and assumptions around value. Yes, they might be Waterford, and yes, they might have no chips in them, but if they're not being used for their fundamental purpose for existence, which of course is to hold wine, then their value is nil. Now, conversely, there's a very easy way to restore the item in question's value. And that, of course, is to give it or sell it or somehow put it in the hands of someone who will use it for its intended purpose. That will restore its value immediately. And so I know some of you parents, grandparents listening, you're going to bristle at this, and I know, but I'm going to say it, and I'm going to back up what I say with personal experience. But when we store items for somebody else for one day, maybe when they have that apartment, maybe when have Cinco de Mayo celebrations in 3 years, I can use those margarita glasses. Whenever we store whatever the item is for some, we are preventing these items from reaching their purpose and their potential right now. Now, I'm going to talk about a microwave for a minute. And a microwave is an interesting example because it's an appliance. It's also an electronic. So I, for a long time, had a microwave sitting in my basement. And it was a perfectly decent microwave, probably middle of the line. It wasn't the cheapest you could buy, but it certainly wasn't the best. It was a working, attractive microwave, but I didn't need it because we had a built-in microwave essentially in our kitchen. So I had this random microwave. I didn't want to get rid of it because, hey, again, I spent good money on that microwave. But the problem with that thinking is, well, there's a couple of problems with that thinking. Number one, thanks to constant product turnover and innovation and dirt cheap prices, waiting just even a year to donate or sell that microwave that's working and perfectly decent, but waiting even just a year makes that working microwave less attractive in the microwave market. And so let's just say I was keeping that microwave for my daughter for when she goes to college. I mean, how long that is aside, I want to keep it for her because she's going to need a microwave when she goes to college. Let's be real. Do you think in 5-ish years, when my daughter goes to college, she's going to want the not dirty, dusty, old, uh, aesthetically out of style microwave that's been sitting in my basement for over a decade when she could go to a store and buy a brand new microwave that performs the utility of heating food for what, like $60? Like, why would she want mine? There's constant product turnover in the appliance and electronics field for sure. Like, what about a TV, a flat screen? Like, you're keeping a flat screen, nobody's going to want it. I hate to say it, but nobody's going to want it in 5 to 10 years because that flat screen is going to be replaced with way better flat screens. Okay. Then there's the dirt cheap prices problem. I'm old enough to remember when flat screens came out and they were expensive because they were hip, new, and cool, and they didn't have the junk in the trunk, right? But now flat screens are pretty darn cheap. They're not well made, but they were never well made, let's be honest. And so why would I want the flat screen that my mother has had in her basement for 10 years when I can just go buy a new one for very little money? And so that brings me to the point. Waiting even just a little bit to donate or sell an item means that you're going to have a harder time donating or selling that item. So pillar 3, let's bring it back around. I'm a teacher, so let's bring it back around. Measure true value. If it's sitting in your home somewhere and it's not being used, its value as of this moment is 0. You can restore the item's value by giving it to somebody who's going to use it. Okay, this one's super quick. Pillar 4. Decluttering's hard. Let me hold on. Okay. Decluttering is hard. It's really hard when you're going through somebody else's stuff, especially somebody who you loved who's deceased stuff. Especially when you get to decades worth of history and regret and guilt and maybe some shame in there. Decluttering can be really darn hard. I don't mean to say it's not. And so when it gets hard, again, you can Google like how to declutter sentimental items and you'll come up with so many suggestions. I suggest a couple things. Number one, you ask the tough questions. Number two, you enlist the help of somebody who's helpful to you. So that's usually a friend. Usually family members are too close to the problem, but specifically or particularly when the stuff you're decluttering is like a mutual deceased family member stuff. So enlist the help of a friend too. I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to talk about it. But ask yourself the tough questions when the going gets hard. These are my favorite. These are my favorite questions. Number one, if you were to go from your, I don't know, 2,800 square foot home to a 848 square foot apartment, if you're downsizing, are you going to bring, if you're drastically downsizing, would you bring this item? Yes or no? Like, what's your gut telling you? What's your intuition saying? Yes or no? Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Would you bring it with you? That's number one. Number two, would you replace it if it broke? Oh my God, I love this question. Okay, so when my cell phone broke, so one day I don't know, like I forgot what happened. Like I dropped it or like the screen was shattered. I couldn't use it. When my cell phone broke, I was at the Apple store in 2 hours and I had a new phone that worked exactly like my old phone within 3 hours of my phone shattering. Okay. I dropped everything on my schedule. I made an appointment. I went to the Apple store, new phone in my hands within 3 hours. That says an awful lot about my own individual tech addiction, and I'm working on that. So I'll just leave that there. However, I say all that to contrast it with what happened when my garlic press snapped. So we all know what a garlic press is. It's that thing you stick a clove of garlic in and minces it for you, right? I had a garlic press and it snapped. It no longer, like the top came out from the bottom. It no longer minced garlic. Well, when my garlic press snapped, I just made do and used a knife. Right? I didn't rush to the store. I didn't change my life around. I think it was many months before I thought to myself, oh, I should replace that. And so I guess I should change this question. And it's not, would you replace it if it broke? The question should read, would you drop everything on your schedule and completely upend your life to replace the item if it broke? What's the answer to that? Next up, what's the worst that could happen if you let it go? I gotta move. I gotta move. So I'll just say that in this world in which goods are overabundant and in which we have eBay and Facebook Marketplace and libraries. Heck, we have libraries. And libraries have borrowing agreements with other libraries. Like, unless an item is one of a kind or handmade or incredibly sentimental, if it's not one of those three things, I'm willing to bet that you can get your hands on the item in question very easily, right? Like the World Wide Web, like you have this random book from, first edition published in 1982, and you want it, but you decluttered it, but you want it back. Guess what, my friends? We have this lovely thing called the World Wide Web. Type it in for the right price. You can get your hands on the item again. Unless, of course, it's sentimental, handmade, one of a kind. And then finally, do you feel guilty? This is where a lot of emotions come up. I'll just say here, I interviewed somebody on my podcast. She was a wife and mother of young children, happily married. Her husband, without going into too much detail, he suddenly passed away in a tragic car accident. Very sudden, very traumatic for everybody. And to cope, so she just took all of his stuff, so his clothes in the closet, his guitar, his leather jacket, because he loved to ride motorcycles. She just took all her things, all his things, and put them in the attic. Because she knew that she was not in an emotional place in which she could like make sound decisions. And I recommend that. Like never declutter when you are on an emotional high. Like we want to do this level in when we're in a level-headed place. So she took all the stuff. She couldn't look at it every day. She just piled it all up and threw it in the attic. All right. Fast forward a decade. Uh, every time she walked by the closet, so it's not a closet, it's like I have an attic where it's a pull down, but she had an attic where it was a door, and then the stairs, the full set of stairs was behind the door. And so every time she walked past the door to the attic, she felt a heaviness in her chest, like an elephant sitting on her chest, I believe was how she described it. It weighed on her in intangible ways, even though she didn't have to visibly see the stuff. She knew it was there. And knowing that the stuff, the remembrances, the trauma was all still there, impacted her days. And so I say all that to say that when our home, I'm not saying declutter your deceased loved one's stuff immediately. I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that when our home is overwhelmed with remembrances of the past, it can be difficult to live in the here and now. So just something to consider. Decluttering deceased loved ones things, that's a whole nother hour. All right. Pillar 5, remove but don't toss. This is where I'm sure you all really have a lot of questions, right? So minimalists may or may not just throw their stuff in the trash can. Sustainable minimalists absolutely do not, because we are in the business of responsible decluttering. Oh gosh, 718. So I always suggest, like, if you're gonna declutter the garage, let's say, and you look at the job and you think to yourself that the garage is going to take 2 days, so like a weekend, a Saturday and a Sunday, I always suggest you double that. So it's not going to take one Saturday and one Sunday. It's going to take 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays, because responsible decluttering takes time. Finding homes for your unwanted possessions takes time, effort, and energy. The job is not done once you make the decision about what you're keeping and what you're not. The job is done when the stuff is given to worthy recipients who want your stuff. It's like laundry, right? The laundry is not done when it's all clean but sitting on the couch. The laundry is only done when the laundry is folded and hung up and put away. Same with decluttering. So I always suggest step 1, try your darndest to keep your unwanted items within your own community. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The big one being, if we're shipping all our stuff all across the country, God forbid, all across the world, we're creating carbon emissions with regard to that habit. So don't contribute to unnecessary carbon emissions. Don't send your DVD collection to, I don't know, insert a place across the world, if somebody in your community wants your DVD collection, right? The other reason too, I suggest you keep items within your community is because you're keeping resources within your own community. In a climate changing world, community is going to mean something. Resources are going to mean something. So keep your resources, not just your stuff, but also your money, also your time within your community whenever possible. So who in your community are you going to give this stuff to? Well, I always suggest step 1. We start easy, and then we start at the nucleus and then we expand outwards, right? So if we're starting at the nucleus, we're going to talk to people we know, friends and family. Maybe somebody you know could use that microwave or that TV in your basement, or those margarita glasses, or whatever it is, okay? However, there is a line here, and the line gets crossed when we give our stuff, the line gets crossed when we push our stuff on family or friends who actually don't want your stuff. I feel like this happened a lot with my own grandmother. I would go visit her and she would hand me a crystal vase as I was walking out the door because she wanted to declutter it. And I'm not going to say no to my grandma, obviously. I didn't need a fifth, sixth, seventh vase, but I'm not going to say no to my grandmother. So I just say that all to say, like, if you're giving it to someone with whom you have a personal relationship, make sure they actually want it and make sure you're not just making yourself feel better by giving the item. Okay. In terms of expanding that area in which we're trying to give our stuff, I always suggest your local buy nothing group. If you don't know what a buy nothing group is, you can go to the website I have listed there. It's essentially, a lot of them are run on Facebook, but it's essentially this lovely non-consumerist group. So it lies outside of the hands of capitalism, essentially, in which community members are saying, hey, I've got this dehumidifier. Does anybody want it? And people say yes. Or, hey, I'm looking for a deep freezer. Does anyone have one? Does anyone have one to offload? And somebody says yes, right? So no financial transactions involved. We're just participating in the free flow of goods. So if you're not acquainted with Buy Nothing, check out the website and look and see if your area has one. I will say that for my neighborhood, or my town, I should say, we don't have a Buy Nothing group, but we do have something that's basically the same thing. We just call it Curb Alert. Curb Alert is what happens when we go on Facebook. We are members of this closed and private group. We say, hey, I have these children's books, these board books, let's say, baby books, to give away. There's a whole bag of them. Come and take them. Please take the whole bag. Like, don't like cherry pick the books you want. Take the whole bag. Here's the address. Just come and take them. They're on the curb. And then they're gone. Because guess what? Lots of people would happily take those books. If you don't want to give your address, you can ask them to private message you. You can meet them in a parking lot, etc. But I will say, with regard to curb alerts and buy nothing groups, you would be surprised at the stuff you can get rid of this way. So in the right-hand side of your screen, there's a article from the Washington Post. They wrote this last year. They highlighted Buy Nothing. And in this article, they followed an animatronic chimpanzee head. And I wish I had the picture because it was this hideous, scary, frightening, mechanical monkey head that talked. And guess what? Somebody said in their Buy Nothing group, like, I have this creepy thing. Who wants it? And it was gone. Somebody wanted it. So don't underestimate the power and the ease of which you can give stuff away for free. If nobody wants it, and even if somebody wants it, but you want to be a little more altruistic, consider your local nonprofits. I've got a bunch listed there. For time's sake, I'm not going to read them, but maybe you read them and write them down. I will just say here too, we are, as sustainable minimalists, in the business of calling first and respecting their answer. So just recently I had old towels, I guess they were, like, they had holes in them. They were just, they needed to go. And so I called my local animal shelter because in the past they have asked for towels and linens for various reasons. So I called and said, hey, are you still taking, towels with holes in them? And they actually said, no, we have an influx. We don't need any more towels at this time. As sustainable minimalists, we are not in the business of just dropping them these towels or whatever the item is after hours at their door. We respect their answer. Don't forget, you can always sell. I've got a bunch of suggestions there too. Just this week, actually, I had these two. It was a pair of very tall, like, decorative corner shelves. Dark wood, just, I've had them for decades and I just thought it was time to go. Like, I want to refresh my space, but I don't want to buy new. So why don't I just get rid of the stuff that I'm no longer appreciating? Okay, so I put these items on Facebook Marketplace. I got 100, that's not an exaggeration, 100 people reaching out to me for this pair of corner shelves. I did end up selling them. I sold them for $100 total. I was happy with that price, but I will say that it was a lot of work. I had 100 people contact me, and when I responded to every single one, one by one, saying, yeah, when can you pick them up? You know, I couldn't get an answer. I couldn't get a solid date, a definitive date. And so I say all that to say, like, I'm glad I sold them. I'm glad I took home $100, but selling takes work and time, right? So if like everybody has a threshold for like how much work they're willing to put in. If an item is $2, if you're selling an item for $2, is it worth that amount of work that you're going to have to put in to sell it? My mother, like her threshold is 50 cents. Like if she can make 50 cents, she's going to sell it. My threshold, I must say, is a little bit higher. All right, so we're expanding from our nucleus, right? We've exhausted all of our local options. Nobody wants the animatronic chimpanzee head. I mean, why not? It's amazing. Then and only then do we expand our geographical parameters. Only if no local option exists. So Google is your best friend. I also wrote Ecosia there because if you don't know, Ecosia is the search engine that doesn't track you and also plants a tree with every searched. I'll just leave that there. So then you use Google, like donating a trombone. See what comes up. Who wants a trombone? That's when you go down the Google rabbit hole. And I'll just say tier two, like we're not in the business as sustainable minimalists of giving away items that are in less than stellar condition. So if you're giving stuff to Goodwill, the Salvation Army, I know Goodwill's kind of not a great example, and I'll explain why in a minute, but like if you're gonna fill up a box of stuff and drop it at the doors of the Salvation Army, let's say, make sure the stuff is in condition that Salvation Army is going to be able to resell. If you are giving them your whole, like if you don't want those towels because they're filled with holes and they're threadbare, nobody else is going to want those towels either. And so to drop them, to leave them at the doors of a charity shop, that's just to give somebody else your problem. And we're not doing that. Goodwill is slightly different in which if you have specifically textiles like stained clothes, shirts with rips or holes, like there's some like visible problem with them, you can pack all of those up right on the box or right on the bag. This is for textile donation or recycling. And Goodwill will take that and they will sell it to textile recyclers. Those items will be made into like stuffing for stuffed animals and pillows and that type of thing. So there are options for even less, the least like the least good stuff in your home, I guess is the best way to say that. But do remember too that some items are indeed trash. And so I know I've gone over and I'm really sorry. And if you're still with me, thank you. What's step 6? This is the 5 pillars of responsible decluttering. But if we declutter our spaces and we don't analyze our place on the consumerism hamster wheel, I feel like we're missing a really amazing opportunity. So I don't have time to go through all of this today. It's 7:30 right now, and we haven't even gotten to questions. But buy new less. And when you do buy new, buy better. Don't buy what you don't need. Like you can acquire stuff you need. First of all, you shouldn't be buying stuff you don't need. Like that's not a flex. That's just wasting your money. And yet today's it item is tomorrow's clutter. Like that's the frank truth. And when you do buy new, you can buy better. Don't buy the junky Wayfair, whatever. I mean, and I know there's privilege issues that come into play and finances, and perhaps the particle board bookshelf is all you can afford. And if that's all you can afford, then certainly do the best you can. However, if you have some more money to spend, perhaps you buy better. So I guess I'll just ask you, Mercedes, do you want me to keep going or do you want me to stop for time?
You can keep going if you would like. I don't see any questions in the chat yet. I had a couple, but I can do that at the end. So if you have more to say, then please, by all means.
Okay, I'm sorry, I never usually go out this
Oh,
over,
it's
but yeah, I
okay.
have a couple more things to say, so I promise like 5 more minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, all right, so acquire without buying, right? Like we talked about buy nothing. So if you need something and you don't need it to be new, sleek, shiny, you can acquire it by going to your buy nothing group and saying, hey, do you have this? Does anybody have this item? I will say, I needed a deep freezer for my basement. I didn't want to spend a couple hundred up to $1,000 on a deep freezer. So I said in my local buy nothing group, does anybody have a deep freezer they're thinking about unloading? Guess what? I had a perfectly fine Energy Star efficient deep freezer that I paid $0 for in maybe 3 days. I had to get my husband to go get it because it was heavy. Like 3 days. Like I can wait 3 days. Um, trust reputable certification. So I'm going to gloss over this. Those little pictures on the back of items. Maybe it says got certified. Maybe there's a bunny. Maybe there's a I don't know, made safe logo. There's some sort of little picture on a product with a third party independent certification. Again, this could be another hour conversation, but those certifications mean something. Like they mean something. They mean that they mean that either the product or the company that manufactured the product jumped through extra hoops to get that certification. So I encourage you to look into what they mean because they mean something. Um, I'll just skip ahead. I'll just skip down to shift your spending mindset. Again, we are taught and trained to buy now, think later. Um, and I certainly started to question that training when I was looming over my pile of stuff back in my little apartment. So instead of buying now and thinking about what we just did later, shift your spending mindset. Cost per wear is a great one. So instead of thinking about how much the sticker price is on that sweater, think about how much you're going to wear it and divide that price tag accordingly. I always use the example of a wool sweater, 100% wool sweater versus like I don't know, let's use a $50 for easy math synthetic fiber. So wool is like the OG natural insulator, right? It is known to keep us warm. So yeah, it's going to cost more. A $100 wool sweater, we could probably get 100 wears out of it minimum. It's also made of natural fiber. So 100 divided by 100, the cost per wear of that item is $1. Now let's contrast that with a synthetic sweater. So it looks great in the store, but you know what happens to a synthetic sweater after one wash, maybe two, it starts to pill. It starts to just look less than stellar. So how many wears are you going to get? Oh, and the big one, a synthetic sweater is not a great insulator. Like it does not keep you warm. It's more for looks than utility. And so if you chose to purchase the $50 synthetic sweater, how many wears are you really going to get out of that? 5 max? Well, 50 divided by 5 is 10. So the cost per wear of that sweater is $10 and a $1 cost per wear for the wool sweater looks really darn good in comparison to the $10 cost per wear of the synthetic sweater. Hope that makes sense. I went through that really quick, but I also suggest you start asking yourself, like, is this item too cheap? Like, is it too cheap? We really need to start asking ourselves, is this item too cheap? Because if it is too cheap, and so many items are too cheap, then that means that costs were cut, like corners were cut. Either environmental corners were cut in terms of illegal waste disposal, perhaps that's just one out of many, or ethical corners were cut. People were not paid living wages to manufacture and create the item. And so I do suggest we start asking ourselves, like, oh, I'm at the dollar store. Like, is a dollar for this? I don't know. Is this bowl too cheap? Like, would the dollar even cover the shipping costs? Probably not. And so then if you decide, yeah, this item is too cheap, that shouldn't be like an exciting reason to buy the item. That your spidey sense should be going off, and it should be a reason to think twice, I guess is the best way to put it. So I did go over and I really apologize, but this is all my items. I have in the square is the podcast uh, artwork. The one that looks like a book is the cover of my book, Sustainable Minimalism. And I'll just say for podcasts, I mean, if you've never listened to a podcast, they're free. It's free information on your phone. So if you don't know how to access them, you can ask that in the chat and I'll answer that as well. So thank you so much. This was so fun.
I